What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're going to be discussing CP point distributions at various checkpoints for Magicka DPS. For a lot of my builds, I assume that people have max CPs, and so I only have CP point distributions for CP 690 people. So that's a bit unfair to everybody, so I decided to basically make a couple of CP point distributions for various what I call major checkpoints along your journey up to max CP. So those checkpoints that I've made were 160, which is basically the gear cap, so that's when you start farming gear. Yeah, if you are interested in doing endgame content, things like that. CP 300, that's where you stop gaining additional resources for every CP point you get. So for those guys who don't know, you get 20% additional resources up until CP 300 just from gaining more CP. So that's the second checkpoint that I got. The third checkpoint is CP 450, just because that is where a lot of people say you're now good enough to start running vet trials as a DPS. Now, I have obviously seen people run vet trials at lower CP levels and be successful, but those tend to be the exceptions to the rule. A lot of guilds prefer that you have at least like 400, 500 CP before you start doing vet trials, so kind of split the difference there and just made 450. So that's the next major checkpoint, and then the final checkpoint that I have is going to be 600 CP. Generally speaking, that's where some people are saying, okay, now you have the chops to do hard mode trials or the vet DLC trials. So again, I have seen people with lower CPs do just as well with, in those trials, but again, those tend to be exceptions and not the rule. So CP 600 is the next major checkpoint, and then of course there's CP 690, which you guys can find in my build videos. So I am at max CP, so I will have to clear out my CPs. To redistribute. Clear. Okay. So this is going to be specific to Magicka DPS. There's going to be more videos looking at stamina DPS CP distributions and healer and tank CP distributions at those various checkpoints. So starting off with their green CPs, the two major ones you're going to be focusing on first are going to be Arcanist and Tenacity. So like in my build videos, you want to hit 75 in both. So let's start off with CP 160. So at CP 160 you have, I want to say 54 into red, 53 into blue, and 53 into green. So this is what I would do here. So you don't have enough CP points to hit the jump points for both Tenacity and Arcanist, either one or the other. So I chose Arcanist instead of Tenacity. So for those of you guys who don't know what jump points are, basically the way CP points percentages work is every number after the percentage point is basically going to be 0. So for example, here at 27 we have Magicka regen of 7%. At 28 it's still going to be 7%, even though it went up from 7.07 to 7.28 because we're ignoring the decimal place. And it's still 7, it's still 7, it's still 7, and it won't turn into 8% until we hit 8.12. So basically what is happening is basically ignore the decimal point afterwards. Basically ESO just floors everything, brings it down to the closest whole number. So that's what we call jump point. So 32, for instance, would be a jump point for Arcanist. So this is what I would recommend for Magicka DPS in terms of CP point distribution when you're at CP 160. These two nodes are going to be very important. They're very powerful, and so you want to get them up as high as you can as quickly as possible. For your blue CPs, this is what I would recommend. Because you want to get that Exploiter passive right now in this current patch, this is probably going to change when Dragon Bones comes out. You want to get up to Exploiter as quickly as you can. So basically you're just going to put all your points, oops, one too many. You're going to put all your points into Thaumaturge here, because again, you want to get the Exploiter passive as quickly as you can. That's just a very, very powerful passive to have right now. Of course, it probably is going to change in Dragon Bones. You're probably not going to see many people running Exploiter on Magicka DPS, but for right now, this is what I would recommend. Just dump points into Thaumaturge until you hit 75, basically. And now for your red CPs. I like to go for a balanced approach when it comes to my red CPs. My build videos, if you guys have watched them, I take a one-size-fits-most situations approach to my red CPs. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing here. So basically, this is what it's going to look like. It's 22. Oops. 22, 33, 33, 44, and 10 into Bastion. So like I said, I like to take a balanced approach. You can, of course, change these around however you like, but the primary nodes that you're going to be focusing on are going to be Ironclad, Thick-Skinned, Hardy, Elemental Defender, and Bastion. Bastion is probably the lowest on the list when it comes to priority, just because Bastion only affects your damage shield. It doesn't really affect any incoming damage, so it's not quite as important to get that up there. So you can actually take these 10 points out of Bastion and put them somewhere else if you'd like to. If you were going to do that, then I would actually put the 5 points into Hardy and Elemental Defender like this, and just take them out of Bastion like so. This is probably the best approach here, just because Hardy and Elemental Defender give you the biggest returns because they reduce basically all magic and all physical damage, so those are very important. Thick-Skinned reduces damage from damage over time effects, which you won't see many of them in the game used by PvE monsters, but it is useful to have for PvP if you are a PvPer. These CP point distributions are kind of more geared towards PvE, but Thick-Skinned is fairly important, especially if you want to do endgame stuff, because there are dots in endgame content that are pretty damaging. Then Ironclad reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks, so basically any attack that deals all of its damage in one hit, which is probably like 75 to 70% of PvE damage you're going to be taking. So that's kind of what I would do for a balanced approach when it comes to our red CPs. Alright, so let's go ahead and clear out our CPs again. So now we're going to be going over if you are at CP 300. So basically this is where you stop gaining additional attribute points or stat resources just by gaining more CP. So again, we'll start with our green CP. So this, at CP 300, you have 100 CPs across your green, red, and blue nodes. So basically, again, you're going to want to do a balanced approach towards Arcanus and Tenacity, putting 100 points, 50 points across each. That will get you up to the jump point, even though the jump point is 49. Pretty easy. Again, you're going to just want to keep on splitting your points between these two until you hit 75 in both. For our blue CPs, it's going to take... So you have 75 in a Thaumaturge at this point, which leaves you 25 points to put elsewhere. So now that you have your Exploiter passive, you can start putting points elsewhere. So first one you're going to want to do is Elemental Expert. That's going to give you the biggest return on investment, just because it boosts all of your damage that you deal. So we're going to put 15 points into Elemental Expert. That leaves 10 additional points. And so this kind of also depends on your build, whether you if you're a Nightblade, you're going to want to put a little bit more points into Elfborn primarily, or a Templar, a Magicka Templar, just because you have additional crit damage. But you can really put those 10 points anywhere between Master-at-Arms and Elfborn. So what I like to do is do 5 into Elfborn, because that hits the jump point, and then put the rest into Master-at-Arms. So that hits the 2% jump point for both of them. So that's the approach that I would do. The most important thing is to put 75 points in the Thaumaturge, so you do get that Exploiter passive, and then you can rearrange the remaining 25 points however you'd like. But I would put more emphasis on Elemental Expert, just because it gives you the largest return per CP spent. And for your red CPs, again, we're going to be taking a more balanced approach, but you can kind of change this however you'd like. So you do have 100 points split across all these different nodes. So obviously the easiest thing to do would be to just put 20 points into each, like so. So that would get you the jump point for Thick-Skinned, Ironclad, and Bastion, but it wouldn't quite hit the jump points for Hardy and Elemental Defender. So what I would actually do is actually take 10 points out of Bastion. Actually a little bit more, I would say. Whoops. Because the jump point is 27. 74, 7, that's 81. Which means we have one more point that we have to actually take out. So this is probably what I would end up doing. Actually, take that point out of Bastion instead. Because again, Bastion only improves your damage shields, not your damage taken, so this is not quite as important as the rest. Going with a balanced approach, so we're going 27 Hardy Elemental Defender that hits the 7% jump point, and then 20 into Thick Skin and 20 into Ironclad to hit that 9% jump point. So this is what I would do. Again, Bastion, not quite as important for right now. This is kind of the last node that you're going to start putting points into. So that's CP 300. So now let's clear again and do CP 450. So now you have 150 points to put into all three nodes, which means you will be able to hit, finally, 75 in Tenacity and Arcanist. So at this point, you can pretty much put green points wherever you like. Mooncalf, Healthy, you know, Shadow Ward, Tumbling. If you see my videos, I like to go Warlord, Tumbling, and Shadow Ward. But you can put points into Mooncalf if you want some additional stamina regen, or Healthy if you want some additional health regen. It's kind of up to you how you want to play out the remaining points that you have remaining. So you have max CP, you have 80 additional points, so you know, play around with it, but the important point again is 75 within both of these two nodes. For our blue CPs, again, we already have 75 in a Thaumaturge for that Exploiter passive, which leaves us 75 to put into the remaining nodes here. So what I would recommend doing is to hit 49 in Elemental Expert, which leaves you 26 additional points, so you can just put 13 into Elfborn, and 13 to Master at Arms for a more balanced approach. This will give you the 6% jump point on both Elfborn and Master at Arms. You can put a couple more points out of Master at Arms and put them in Elfborn if you'd like. That's kind of how you want to play it. So kind of at this point I'm going to talk about Spell Erosion, because now you have enough CPs to kind of wonder if you should put points into Spell Erosion. And my answer to that is it depends. If you are running the Lover, you don't need to put any points into Spell Erosion typically. Obviously it depends on the number of debuffs you have in the group and things like that. But generally speaking, at this level of CP, I would probably just end up running the Lover, recommend using the Lover instead of something like the Apprentice instead. And this is just because at this point in your progression, you don't really have enough CPs to spare towards Spell Erosion, because then you're giving up damage in other areas. So instead of kind of taking points out of Elemental Expert and putting them into Spell Erosion to make the penetration cap, I would just go with the Lover. Yes, it is going to end up doing a little bit less compared to Apprentice, but it's at the same time, you will, if you take points out of Elemental Expert and put them in a Spell Erosion, you're still going to see that same drop in DPS. So it's just easier just to stick with the Lover until you get enough CP points that you can start putting them into Spell Erosion instead. So that's kind of my take on Spell Erosion. Other people recommend, you know, taking points out of Elemental Expert and putting them into Spell Erosion. That's kind of up to you, but the Lover is probably going to be the better option here, for blue CPs at least. And finally, for our red CPs, again, we're going with a more balanced approach with a little less emphasis on Bastion. So we have 150 points here, so we are going to hit 49 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That leaves us with 52 points left. So we're going to do 26 Thick-Skinned, 26 Ironclad. That gives us 51 points, which, if you're doing the math, basically lets us sit even. So this is if you don't want to put any points in the Bastion at all, if you want to ignore Bastion entirely. If you do want to put points in the Bastion though, hit 43 instead in Hardy Elemental Defender, and then put the remaining 12 here. So you have 12 plus 112, which is 124, plus your 26, which is 150. So this is if you want to put points into Bastion. So I would just put 12 points into Bastion and just hit 43 instead of 49 on Hardy Elemental Defender instead, if you want to put points into Bastion. Alright, so we're going to clear it again. And so now this is CP 600. So now at this point you have plenty of CPs. You have 200 across each of the 4 different trees. So here we go. So again, you just want to have 75 into Arcanist and Tenacity, like so, which gives you 50 additional points. And like I said earlier, you can kind of play around however you'd like with the remaining CP nodes. So if you are wanting to do what I do and do Warlord, Shadow Ward, and Tumbling, then you know, do some just play around. Just make sure you're hitting those jump points with the remaining 50 points. So let's see. If I do 16, 16, 20, and 14. That's probably what I would do. Just because you at least hit the jump point on Warlord. We won't hit it on Tumbling, so it's kind of the downside, but that's what I would do personally if I was at CP 600. But like I said, you can kind of play around with those remaining 50 points however you like and split them among different nodes. For our blue CPs, like before, 75 into Thaumaturge, which leaves us with 125 to put everywhere else. So now this is kind of where we can start putting points into Spell Erosion. So we're going to start with 49 into Elemental Expert. So that leaves us with, let's see, it's 49, let's see, 75, that's 100, 124, which leaves us 26 plus 50 is 76 additional points, so this is what I would do. 31, 31, and then put the remaining points into here, so that's, oops, one too many, 14 points into Spell Erosion. So now at this point you can start putting a couple of points into Spell Erosion, so it might be worth starting to move out of Lover and put them towards Apprentice. Again, this is kind of depending on your raid group, obviously. So if you do have stuff like Alkosh and Infused Torag's Crusher, then you don't need to put as many points into Spell Erosion compared to a group that's just using Torag's Infused Crusher and nothing else. So kind of play around however you like. This is kind of what I would do in a group that only has Infused Torag's Crusher but no Alkosh. If you don't have Alkosh, if you do have Alkosh, I should say, I'm actually going to take those points out again and just put them into here. Again, evenly split, like so. So 38 into Mastered Arms, 38 into Elfborn. So that's kind of how I would do it if I did have Alkosh in the group. Finally, for our red CPs, again, we're going with the balanced approach. So 49 Hardy, 49 Elemental Expert, 31 Thickskin, 31 Ironclad, 31 Bastion, and that leaves 9 additional points, so we're actually going to do this. Actually, no, reverse that. Take those, and like, oops. And down, not up. This is what I would do. 49 Hardy, 49 Elemental Expert, 34 Thickskin, 37 Ironclad, 31 into Bastion. At this point, you can pretty much start ignoring Bastion. You can put like 3 or... You can hit the next jump point, which is 34 or 37 if you'd like, as you continue to level. But 31 is perfectly fine for Bastion, because that does give you the Infusion passive, which is really useful, and you could, I guess, try to go for the Revival, but it's not really all that helpful. Infusion is the passive that you want to hit, at least in the Lord. So this is what I would do for a balanced approach towards CP point distributions. And so that's pretty much it for the various jump points there. I will write them down in the description below, and I will also put timestamps for everything in the description below as well, just so you guys have a more written up guide. But that's pretty much it for CP points 160, 300, 450, and 600. And again, 690 are going to be in my build videos. That's how I distribute my CP point distributions. So now you guys kind of have an idea of where to put CP point distributions as you level. Just make sure to try to hit those jump points, and again, try to focus in on Thaumaturge on your blue tree, Arcanist and Tenacity on your green trees, Hardy and Elemental Defender on your red trees, because those will give you the best bang for your buck. Once you hit 75 into Thaumaturge on your blue trees, start focusing on Elemental Defender, because again, best bang for your buck there. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.